Whenever we think about the arcade games of Sega in which they weren't short of producing quality hits during the 1980s, we automatically think greats such as Outrun, Afterburner, Golden Axe, or even Space Harrier. The list is truly endless, and most of these I have covered in this series. One game that isn't thought of in the same way is Crackdown. This fairly ambitious and extremely cleverly produced 1989 arcade release is in some ways ignored or at least not spoken about very much these days. If you have never played Crackdown or even seen gameplay of it before, the gameplay screen will likely look a little confusing to you because there really is so much going on all at once. And I will say here that this game has nothing to do with the Xbox 360 2007 game. We control either Ben or Andy as a single player game or control both at once as a two-player game. The aim of Crackdown then is to ultimately take down the mad scientist, aka Mr. X. We can do this by planting bombs throughout the top-down perspective looking levels. We have a map of each level at the top of the center of the screen, which points our current position as well as marks where the bombs need to be planted, which are marked off with red crosses. Once we have planted them, we can proceed to the exit points of the level. The map also indicates where enemies are located as well as collectibles too. We walk through the level shooting down cyborgs whose AI for 1989 is fairly impressive. We can throw grenades and other destructibles to kill everything on screen, and we can also lean against walls in order to avoid being shot, which is instant death. To the right hand of the screen you will see a blank screen, which is where player 2 can simultaneously play the game. This is going to make a fairly interesting video today due to the complexities of the original arcade game with so much happening. So today we are ranking from worst to best, the very best home conversion of Sega's very awesome 1989 arcade game, Crackdown. At first glance and for the first level, the ZX Spectrum 128K conversion by US Gold seems great and plays fairly well too. As the game progresses, things rapidly go downhill very quickly, and it's a real shame. Firstly, the presentation isn't bad at all. The screen is organised like the arcade game itself, and with the Spectrum's limited abilities, it actually does a really good job here. Things do go downhill though, as I said, and as I played through this version, it got worse, notably at times when shooting at enemies. I noticed that bullets aren't actually coming out of my weapon at all, and that's not a lack of ammo either. One of the most annoying bugs with this release though is that enemies can at times shoot through walls at you and kill you. I found myself losing many lives because of this, and of course because Crackdown has walls everywhere in which we often use for cover, having enemy bullets kill us like this can get very annoying very quickly. I also found that as I was getting through each level, although the game originally started and played fine, it did eventually start to lose its speed and did begin to lag a little later into the game. Now, most frustratingly above all is of course we are on a timer in each level, and having a map to display where the bombs need to be planted is a bonus. It aids us and saves us time to make it out of each level in time. The problem is that the map doesn't clearly show where we need to plant bombs, and so most of the time I found myself endlessly walking around trying to find the crosses. Meanwhile, the time is ticking away. I found the game a little shoddy, and with a little more cooking and tidying up, then this 1990 ZX Spectrum conversion could have been perfect. It even gives us an animation when planting bombs. Sadly, it just has far too many bugs and annoyances to rate this version any higher. This Amstrad CPC release is a mega upgrade from the previous ZX Spectrum version. Although this version, again by US Gold, released in 1990, is actually far from perfect, which is a little annoying considering this version looks really good, and we can most certainly make out where bombs need to be placed with this nicer coloured map. The real annoyance with this version is collision detection, and it's fairly bad here too. I had many times here where I would shoot at cyborgs and it would not destroy them, and like I said, this happens far too often, along with enemies also walking through me without actually killing me, and vice versa. In terms of the speeds this game is running at, I actually had no issues with it here. It all ran fairly well for an Amstrad CPC game in comparison to the ZX Spectrum version. We have no music here whilst the game itself is playing, and the sound effects are okay as we are playing through the game. Everything is pretty much here as to what to expect from a good 8-bit home computer version of Crackdown, and it is nicely coloured like I said, and has some fairly nicely detailed graphics too. The most crucial part of any shooting game is of course to stay alive and taking down enemies before they actually shoot you. It's just too broken to achieve this with this Amstrad release. There were times where I was even leaning against walls in order to avoid oncoming bullets being fired at me, and yet the bullets still managed to kill me even though I was leaning against walls at times. We have nicely designed bomb planting animation scenes here, and to be fair, it's fairly okay to control Ben or Andy too in this game. Issues which the Spectrum port had, such as bullets coming through walls, didn't actually appear here, and since we could actually see the map clearly, it did kind of make the game easier to navigate despite the major issues with its collision detections. Now, I've found it difficult where to rank this IBM PC DOS conversion of Crackdown. It's a beautifully designed game both visually and most definitely in terms of its music production too. We have everything here with this 1990 Sega of America release. We have an introduction video to the game itself before we start playing, which looks really nice for a DOS game of this era. The noticeable difference with what you have seen so far is of course the graphics. And yes, these are undoubtedly light years ahead of both Amstrad and Spectrum versions, and even the next version in this list. But really, that is where I need to stop praising this DOS game. A good example of gameplay before graphics can actually be seen here. Although the game seems to not really suffer from annoying bugs like the plagued CPC game, where this game truly suffers with its major letdown is in terms of its frame rates. It's extremely bad right from the get-go. Now, you could argue that the CPU speeds are wrong here, but by boosting CPU speeds, the game plays way too fast. And judging from other gameplay videos of this game, then this speed seems more or less how it played originally. It's such a shame because this DOS version was fairly accurate to how the arcade game played. Everything is here from punching and kicking enemies, the sprites that more or less looked the part too. Even the map was a good one here in order to find bomb placements. And like I said, the music production here is pretty damn good too. Sadly, due to those awful, really bad frame rates, the game almost feels unplayable at times, and found myself dying many more times than I should have been due to all of this. Many Commodore 64 arcade ports had both an American release as well as a European release. Normally, one of these releases is much better than the other one. Crackdown, however, received just one release of this game, and as you can see from the gameplay footage, this is a major upgrade from the other two 8-bit computer versions for many reasons. Firstly, we have some seriously awesome SID music for the game here by Mark Cooksey. Hit collision detection isn't absolutely perfection here by any means, but it is a hell of a lot better than, say, the Amstrad CPC's release. When shooting at cyborg enemies, I would say around 95% of the time they would actually be destroyed here. Sprite animation is looking much more substantial too. The movement of Ben or Andy is nice here too, and controlling feels much nicer too. Now, I do actually, however, have a couple of snags with this release, again by US Gold. Problem is that this game is actually tougher than it needs to be, and that's down to the screen and how it scrolls through the game. Instead of it naturally and freely scrolling as we move through each map, with this Commodore 64 version, we move to the sides of each gameplay area for the next part to slowly scroll across to reveal the next part of the map. And this can be very annoying as enemies are dotted around everywhere, and as it slowly scrolls we cannot see what is in front of us, and very often this can cause cause a loss of life very easily. We can make out where we need to plant our bombs, but I think in that respect, the Amstrad CPC's version of the map is actually illustrated much nicer and clearer. As a game itself then, this C64 release looked miles apart from the Spectrum and Amstrad's versions, with much larger looking sprites, and although the annoyance with the scroll in the gameplay fields were something to consider, I think it's actually swings and roundabouts. But at least here we don't have a major issue with collision detection or bullets which can kill us coming through walls. There appears to be no issue with leaning against walls with this version either. Like I said, not absolute perfection by any means, and that was largely down to the scrolling here. You could say that this was a less frustrating 8-bit computer version of Crackdown. The Atari ST had a release of Crackdown 2. I'll not comment too much here as the next version is almost identical to this version, although the next version in this video played at a better speed as well as had better music and sound effects. I wonder if you can guess which platform the next version was for. In many ways, the Commodore Amiga release reminded me of the C64 version, only, of course, a much more polished game graphically and the music sound much more like the arcade game itself. Of course, with this release, we also have the beauty of music and sound effects during gameplay, and we don't have to have one without the other, which is the normal scenario for many 16-bit computer games. The reason I say that it reminds me of the C64 release is, as good as a version this is, it's mainly let down by the scrolling and waiting for the screen to reveal more of the map that we are playing through. Of course, we do have a nice, bright and more detailed map of the levels, which isn't so frustrating for the eye to view to guide us where we're actually going. I would say that colour wise and sprite design is probably the nicest looking out of all versions in this video. Andy controls really nicely here too, and hit collision detection seems pretty much perfect here, as well as when I lean against walls for cover. I really have no idea if this is generally a hard version of the game itself, or if the scrolling situation makes it just too difficult to play. At this point, I think if coders behind different versions of this game, particularly the versions which like this are made of slow scrolling, if they actually zoom the gameplay out to show more of the gameplay area, then I don't think the slow scroll would be much of an issue, or at least so annoying. It is almost like the sprites are just far too big for the gameplay areas themselves here. It was finally nice to find a version of Crackdown in which I actually enjoyed playing, and the reason that it was so nice to play was simply down to the Mega Drive and Genesis version having a much more zoomed out perspective, and the sprites were just about right where they didn't seem too big to constantly get shot at. The scrolling of the levels was also perfect with this version, and it didn't tend to take forever scrolling to reveal more of the map whilst we are blindly getting shot at. This Sega 16-bit release truly is the best version of Crackdown that you will likely get out of all the other versions in this video. We have introductory animation before the game starts, even animated cutscenes between levels at times. Once we finish levels, then just like the arcade game, our bomber timer counts down and the screen flashes. It even has the tone of the electronic countdown too here. Sure, the map is pretty basic and it did remind me of an Atari 2600 game, but its simplicity through its basic design was likely the best map out of all versions in this video. It actually seems like a great help and wasn't too overwhelming to look at either. All versions of this game, apart from this one, offered no options menu to at least change difficulty levels, but we actually had this here, as well as having the option to increase ammunition or decrease ammunition. I think looking back at all the versions of Crackdown, it was a real shame that several had so many issues, which made the game so tough when it didn't need to be. It took until this 1991 release to actually give kids and adults a great home conversion of the arcade classic, and oddly enough, it wasn't put out by US Gold either. Sega Enterprises actually did, and that's likely why this version is what I think is arguably arguably the very best version of Crackdown. They even included voice samples here, and explosions looking sounds really awesome too. And that's it for ranking every version of Sega's very awesome Crackdown today. Which version did you have? Did you have a really awful version of this game? And judging by every version of this game, there was many fairly bad ones. So anyways, as always, leave a comment in the comment section. And if you're new to this series, I'll drop a link to my playlist so you can catch up with every arcade port that I've covered so far. Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.